The rain hit the apartment window like angry fingers tapping against glass. Sarah pressed her face to the cold surface, watching water streak down in crooked lines. Behind her, Emma coughed again, that wet, rattling sound that had been getting worse for 3 days. The fever had broken an hour ago, but Sarah's hands still shook as she checked her daughter's temperature for the 10th time. "Mommy, I'm thirsty," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Sarah rushed to the kitchen, stepping over the pile of unpaid bills scattered on the floor. The electricity notice sat on top, bright red letters screaming that she had 2 days left. 2 days before they'd sit in darkness. She filled a plastic cup with water, the kind they gave away free at the diner where she worked double shifts. The apartment felt smaller tonight. Maybe it was the way the walls seemed to press in when Emma got sick. Maybe it was knowing that her last $20 had gone to children's medicine that barely helped. Sarah sat on the edge of the narrow bed she shared with her 4-year-old daughter, watching Emma's chest rise and fall. "Tell me about the stars again," Emma said, her eyes still closed. Sarah looked out the window. No stars tonight, just the gray city sky that never got dark enough to see them. But she told the story anyway, the one about how stars were really holes poked in the sky so light could shine through. Emma smiled, that sleepy smile that made everything worth it. The phone rang. Sarah jumped. Nobody called at 2 in the morning unless something was wrong. She grabbed the old flip phone from the nightstand, heart pounding. "Hello?" Silence. Then a man's voice, deep and tired. "Lisa? Lisa, please don't hang up. I know it's late, but I couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about what you said about us being over. Maybe we could try again?" Sarah stared at the phone. Wrong number. She should hang up. Tell him he had the wrong person and go back to watching Emma sleep. That would be normal. That would be smart. But something in his voice stopped her. The way it cracked on the word, over. The way he sounded like he was drowning and reaching for anything to hold on to. "I'm not Lisa," she said quietly. A long pause. "Oh, I'm sorry. I must have." "Wait." The word came out before she could stop it. "Are you okay?" Another pause, longer this time. Sarah could hear him breathing on the other end, could almost feel him deciding whether to hang up or stay on the line with a stranger. "No," he said finally. "I don't think I am." Sarah looked at Emma, peaceful now in sleep. She thought about all the nights she'd felt like drowning too, all the times she'd wished someone would ask if she was okay. Really ask and really listen. "Do you want to talk about it?" And so they did. For an hour, Sarah sat in her tiny apartment talking to a man she'd never met. He told her about his ex-girlfriend who'd left him for someone else. About how success in business meant nothing when you went home to an empty house every night. About how he'd been driving around the city for hours, not knowing where to go. Sarah told him about Emma's fever, about the bills, about working at a diner where customers sometimes left tips that paid for groceries. She told him things she'd never said out loud, about being scared and tired and wondering if she was strong enough to keep going. His name was James, and his voice got steadier as they talked. He had a way of listening that made Sarah feel heard, really heard for the first time in months. "Where are you?" he asked as the conversation wound down. Sarah almost hung up then. Almost remembered that talking to strangers on the phone at 3 in the morning wasn't something responsible mothers did. Almost. "Riverside Apartments on 5th Street, she said. "Building C, Apartment 2B. The ones with the broken gate? You know it? I drive past there sometimes. On my way to nowhere, I guess." He was quiet for a moment. "Would it be crazy if I came by? Just to make sure you and Emma are okay?" Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This was how horror movies started. This was how women ended up on the news. But something about James felt different. Safe. Maybe it was the way he'd listen without trying to fix everything. Maybe it was how he'd asked about Emma by name, remembering details from their conversation. "It would be crazy," she said. But I think I'd like that." 30 minutes later, Sarah heard footsteps in the hallway. A soft knock on the door, gentle enough not to wake Emma. Sarah looked through the peephole and saw a man about her age, tall and tired-looking, holding a bag from the all-night pharmacy. She opened the door. James had kind eyes and clothes that probably cost more than Sarah made in a month, but he didn't look like money. He looked like someone who'd been driving around lost, same as her. He held up the pharmacy bag. "I thought you might need more medicine for Emma," he said. "And maybe some tea. For you." Sarah stared at him. 6 hours ago, she'd been alone with a sick child and no hope. Now a stranger stood in her doorway, offering help without asking for anything in return. "Thank you," she whispered. And James stepped inside, not knowing that this moment would change both their lives forever. James set the pharmacy bag on Sarah's kitchen counter, his eyes taking in the small apartment. He didn't stare at the peeling paint or the stack of bills, didn't make her feel small for living in a place that could fit in his walk-in closet. Instead, he asked quietly, "How is she doing?" Sarah led him to the bedroom where Emma slept, her breathing easier now but still labored. James knelt beside the bed, watching the little girl with gentle eyes. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She looks like you." Something warm spread through Sarah's chest. People always said Emma looked like her father, the man who'd left when pregnancy became real instead of just talk. But James saw her in Emma's face and somehow that mattered. "The fever broke about an hour before you called," Sarah said. "But she's still not eating much." James nodded, pulling a small bottle from the pharmacy bag. "This is better than what they sell at the grocery store. My sister's kids get sick a lot." He paused. My sister had kids." Sarah caught the past tense, the way his shoulders tensed. "Had. She died 2 years ago. Car accident. Her kids live with my parents now, 3 states away." James's voice went flat, the way voices do when people talk about loss they haven't learned how to carry yet. "I used to visit every weekend. Now it's too hard." Sarah wanted to say she was sorry, wanted to offer comfort the way he'd comforted her on the phone. But Emma stirred, making small sounds of distress. "Mommy?" Emma's eyes fluttered open, fever bright and confused. "Who's that man?" "This is James," Sarah said, smoothing Emma's hair. "He brought you medicine to help you feel better." Emma studied James with the serious expression 4-year-olds got when meeting new people. "Are you a doctor?" "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who wanted to help." "Why?" James smiled, the first real smile Sarah had seen from him. "Because your mom is very brave and brave people deserve help sometimes." Emma nodded like this made perfect sense. "Mommy cries sometimes but she doesn't think I know." Sarah's cheeks burned. She opened her mouth to explain, to make excuses, but James spoke first. "All moms cry sometimes. It doesn't mean they're not brave. Sometimes crying is the bravest thing you can do." Emma considered this. "Do you cry?" "Yes," James said simply. "I cried tonight before I called your mom by mistake." "Was it a good mistake?" James looked at Sarah, then back at Emma. "I think so. What do you think?" "Good mistakes are when something goes wrong but then something better happens," Emma said with the wisdom of someone who'd learned early that life didn't always go as planned. "Like when we moved here and I was sad, but then I met Mrs. Chin downstairs and she teaches me Chinese words." Sarah felt tears threatening. Emma never complained about their tiny apartment, never asked why they'd had to leave their old place when the rent got too high. She just found new things to love, new people to trust. "That's exactly what a good mistake is," James said. "Now, how about some of this new medicine? And your mom looks like she could use some tea." The next hour passed quietly. James made tea while Sarah gave Emma her medicine, then they all sat together in the small living room. Emma curled up on Sarah's lap, finally relaxed enough to eat a few crackers. James sat across from them in the only chair, looking comfortable despite being in a place so different from his world. "Tell me about your job," Sarah said, wanting to know more about this man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she'd been too proud to pray. "I buy companies that are failing and try to fix them," James said. "Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't." "That sounds important." James shrugged. "It pays well." "I'm not sure if it's important." He was quiet for a moment. "What about you?" "Besides the diner." "Besides the diner, I'm a mom. That's my real job." Sarah stroked Emma's hair. "Everything else is just how I pay for this." "You're good at it? Being a mom, I mean." "I don't know about that. Half the time I'm making it up as I go." My sister used to say the same thing. But her kids adored her, same as Emma adores you. James's voice got soft again. "She would have liked you." They talked until dawn, voices low so Emma could sleep. James told Sarah about growing up with money but feeling empty, about building a business empire that impressed everyone but satisfied no one. Sarah told him about getting pregnant at 19, about trying to finish college while working 3 jobs, about the day Emma's father packed his bags and said he wasn't ready to be tied down. "His loss," James said simply. "That's what I tell myself on good days." "What about bad days?" Sarah looked down at Emma, now sleeping peacefully against her chest. "Bad days I wonder if I'm enough. If she deserves better than what I can give her." "She deserves you," James said with quiet certainty. "That's what she deserves." The sun was coming up outside, painting the small apartment in golden light. James should leave, Sarah knew. He had his own life to get back to, his own world that didn't include struggling single mothers and cramped apartments. But he made no move to go. Instead he asked, "When do you work today?" "I don't. I called in sick yesterday when Emma got worse. I can't afford to miss another day." "What if you could?" Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" "What if I covered your shift? Paid you what you would have made so you can stay home with Emma until she's completely better." The offer was too much, too generous from someone she'd just met. Sarah's pride bristled even as relief flooded through her. "I can't let you do that." "Why not?" Because I don't know you. Because people don't just do things like that." "Maybe they should," James said quietly. "Maybe the world would be different if more people did things like that." Emma stirred in Sarah's arms, opening sleepy eyes. "Is the nice man staying for breakfast?" Sarah looked at James, seeing hope and loneliness and something else in his face. Something that looked like home. "Would you like to stay for breakfast?" she heard herself ask. James smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and made him look 10 years younger. "I'd like that very much." Sarah rummaged through her near-empty cabinets, trying to figure out how to make breakfast for 3 people with ingredients for 1. She had 2 eggs, half a loaf of bread that was still good if you didn't look too close at one corner, and some instant coffee that tasted like burnt water. "I'm not much of a cook," she said, embarrassed by how little she had to offer. James appeared in the tiny kitchen doorway. "I could run to the store." "No." The word came out sharper than Sarah intended. She softened her voice. "Thank you, but no. We're fine." Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, but it was all she had left some days. James seemed to understand. He didn't push, didn't insist on helping in ways that would make her feel smaller. "Can I scramble eggs?" he asked instead. "I'm pretty good at that." Sarah hesitated, then stepped aside. "Emma likes them fluffy." Fluffy eggs coming up. Sarah watched James work, his expensive shirt sleeves rolled up as he whisked eggs in her chipped bowl. He moved around her kitchen like he belonged there, not bumping into things or looking out of place in the cramped space. Emma padded out of the bedroom, her fever finally gone but still moving slowly. She climbed onto one of the 2 kitchen chairs, chin barely reaching the table. "Are you making breakfast, Mr. James?" "I am. And you can just call me James." "Mommy says I have to call grown-ups Mr. or Miss." James glanced at Sarah, who was making the coffee stretch by adding extra water. "Your mom is right. But if it's okay with her, you can call me James. We're friends now." Emma looked at Sarah with hopeful eyes. Sarah nodded, though something in her chest felt tight. Friends. Such a simple word, but Sarah hadn't had many of those lately. People drifted away when your life got complicated, when you couldn't afford to go out or contribute to group gifts or keep up with their problems because your own felt too big. "James," Emma said, testing the name. "Do you have any kids?" "No, I don't." "Why not?" "Emma," Sarah warned, but James smiled. "It's okay. That's a good question." James flipped the eggs, perfectly fluffy. "I guess I never found the right person to have kids with." "What about Lisa?" Sarah cringed. Emma remembered everything, and last night she'd heard James's side of the phone conversation when he'd called looking for his ex-girlfriend. "Lisa didn't want kids," James said simply. "We wanted different things." "What kind of different things?" James plated the eggs, giving Emma the biggest portion even though she was the smallest person at the table. "She wanted to travel and go to parties and buy expensive things. I thought I wanted those things too, but it turns out I wanted something else." "What did you want?" James sat down across from them, his knees bumping the table in the small space. "I wanted this." "Breakfast?" Emma asked, confused. "Family breakfast. People to take care of. Someone to come home to who'd be happy to see me." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. The way James looked at her when he said, "someone to come home to," made her stomach flutter in ways she'd forgotten were possible. "Mommy doesn't have anyone to come home to either, except me," Emma said matter-of-factly. "But I'm always happy to see her." "I bet you are," James said. "You're lucky to have each other." They ate breakfast in the warm morning light streaming through the single window. Emma chattered about her favorite TV shows and asked James a dozen questions about everything from his car to whether he liked ice cream. Sarah found herself relaxing, watching this man who'd been a stranger 12 hours ago act like being here was the best part of his day. After Emma finished eating, she curled up on the couch with a picture book. Sarah started clearing dishes, but James was already up, rinsing plates in the sink. "You don't have to do that," Sarah said. "I know." He kept washing. "I want to." Sarah dried the dishes he handed her, their fingers brushing as they worked together. Such a simple thing, cleaning up breakfast dishes, but it felt intimate in a way that made Sarah's heart race. "Can I ask you something?" James said quietly so Emma couldn't hear. "Sure." "Yesterday when you told me about the bills, How bad is it really? Sarah's hand stilled on the dish towel. She wanted to lie, to pretend things weren't as desperate as they were. But something about James made honesty feel possible. Bad, she admitted. I'm 3 months behind on rent. The electricity gets shut off in 2 days. I've been putting off taking Emma to the doctor because I can't afford the copay. Her voice got smaller. I applied for assistance, but there's a waiting list. There's always a waiting list. James nodded, his jaw tight. What if I helped? James, no. I can't. Not a handout, he said quickly. A job. I meant what I said about needing someone to help fix failing companies. Most of them fail because they lose sight of what matters. They need someone who understands what it's like to struggle, what it's like to make every dollar count. Sarah stared at him. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance. Good salary, health insurance, flexible hours so you can be there for Emma. And before you say no, let me ask you something. When was the last time someone offered you a chance? Sarah's throat felt tight. The last time someone had offered her a chance, she'd been 18 and naive, and it had ended with her pregnant and alone. But this felt different. James felt different. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for someone you just met? James was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the city waking up below. My sister used to volunteer at a shelter. She'd come home and tell me about families living in their cars, kids going to school hungry, mothers working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. I'd write checks, big ones, because that's what rich people do. We write checks and feel good about ourselves. He turned to face Sarah fully. But last night, talking to you, seeing how you take care of Emma even when you're barely holding on, I realized I've been writing checks to feel better about myself, not to actually help. This isn't charity, Sarah. This is me finally figuring out how to do something that matters. Emma looked up from her book. Are you going to cry again, James? James laughed, wiping his eyes. Maybe a little. It's okay, Emma said seriously. Mommy cries when she's happy too. She cried when I took my first steps and when I learned to write my name. Sarah felt tears on her own cheeks now. Emma, sweetheart, why don't you go get dressed? We need to go to the store later. Emma nodded and padded back to the bedroom. Sarah and James stood in the small kitchen, the morning light making everything feel possible and terrifying at the same time. I don't know how to accept help, Sarah said finally. I don't know how to give it without making it weird, James admitted. We'll figure it out together. Sarah looked at this man who'd answered a wrong number and ended up in her kitchen, offering her a way out of the hole she'd been digging herself deeper into for months. It was too good to be true. It had to be. But Emma's laughter from the bedroom reminded her that sometimes good things did happen. Sometimes people showed up when you needed them most. Okay, she said quietly. Yes, I'll try. James's smile was like sunrise. When can you start? 3 days later, Sarah stood outside a glass building downtown, wearing her only interview outfit and holding Emma's hand. The clothes were 5 years old and a little tight, but they were clean and professional. Emma wore her best dress, the blue one with tiny flowers that Sarah had found at a thrift store. It's very tall, Emma whispered, looking up at the building that seemed to touch the clouds. Yes, it is, Sarah agreed, her stomach churning with nerves. James had called the day before to set up the meeting. Not an interview, he'd insisted. Just a chance for Sarah to see where she'd be working and meet the team. But Sarah knew better. This was her one shot to prove she could handle a job that paid 3 times what she made at the diner. The lobby was all marble and glass, the kind of place where footsteps echoed and everyone looked important. Sarah felt very small and very out of place. The security guard glanced at them with raised eyebrows. We're here to see James Harrison, Sarah said, trying to sound confident. The guard's expression changed immediately. Mr. Harrison is expecting you. 32nd floor. The elevator ride felt like it took forever. Emma pressed her nose against the glass wall, watching the city shrink below them. We're so high up, Mommy. Look. Sarah looked and immediately regretted it. Heights had never been her friend. She focused on the elevator buttons instead, counting floors until they reached 32. The doors opened to reveal a reception area that looked like something from a magazine. Everything was sleek and modern, from the furniture to the art on the walls. A woman with perfect hair and a suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent looked up from behind a curved desk. You must be Sarah, she said warmly. I'm Rebecca, Mr. Harrison's assistant. He's waiting for you in his office. Sarah followed Rebecca down a hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. Emma's hand was sweaty in hers, and Sarah realized she wasn't the only one feeling nervous. It's going to be okay, baby, she whispered. I know, Emma whispered back. James is nice. Rebecca knocked on a door at the end of the hallway, then opened it without waiting for an answer. Sarah and Emma are here. James's office was huge, with windows that showed the entire city spread out below. But what struck Sarah most was how lived in it felt. There were books everywhere, coffee cups on the desk, and a jacket thrown over one of the chairs. It felt like a place where someone actually worked, not just posed for photos. James stood up from behind his desk, smiling when he saw them. He looked different in his work environment, more polished, more powerful, but his eyes were the same kind ones from her kitchen 3 days ago. Sarah, Emma, welcome. He came around the desk to greet them. How was the elevator ride? Very high, Emma said solemnly. It is very high. Would you like to see the view? James led them to the windows, pointing out landmarks in the city below. Emma pressed her hands against the glass, fascinated by how small everything looked from up here. See that building over there, the red one? That's where they make ice cream. And that green space is the park where they have concerts in the summer. Do you ever go to the concerts? Emma asked. James paused. No, I don't. I should though. Mommy and I go sometimes. We bring a blanket and sit on the grass. It's free. That sounds perfect, James said, and Sarah could tell he meant it. Rebecca appeared in the doorway. The team is ready when you are. James nodded, then looked at Sarah. Ready to meet everyone? Sarah's nerves came flooding back. What exactly are you telling them about me? The truth. That you're smart and hardworking and you understand what it's like when money is tight. That's exactly what we need for this project. The conference room was full of people in expensive suits, all looking polished and important. Sarah felt like a fraud sitting at the long table, Emma quiet beside her in the chair James had specifically requested for her. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Sarah and her daughter Emma, James said. Sarah will be joining us as a consultant on the Morrison Industries account. A woman with short gray hair leaned forward. What's your background, Sarah? Sarah's mouth went dry. These people probably had MBAs and decades of experience. What was she supposed to say? That she dropped out of college to have a baby? That her most recent experience was serving coffee to truckers? I've been working in customer service for several years, she said carefully. Frontline experience with people who are struggling financially. I understand what it's like when every dollar matters. James jumped in. Morrison Industries is hemorrhaging customers because they've lost touch with who they're serving. Sarah brings a perspective we've been missing. A man at the end of the table pulled out a tablet. Morrison's customer base is primarily working-class families. Income levels between $25,000 and $50,000 annually. They've been shopping elsewhere because Morrison raised prices across the board. By how much? Sarah asked. 15% across all departments. Sarah almost laughed. 15% might not sound like much to you, but when you're budgeting groceries down to the penny, 15% means choosing between meat for dinner and medicine for your kid. The room got quiet. Sarah realized she'd spoken more bluntly than she should have, but the words were already out there. Go on, the gray-haired woman said. Sarah took a breath. Morrison built their reputation on being the place where regular people could afford to shop. When they raised prices, they told their customers that they didn't matter anymore. Those customers didn't just find somewhere else to shop, they found somewhere that respected them. So what would you recommend? The man with the tablet asked. Roll back the price increases. All of them. Then figure out where else to cut costs, executive salaries, corporate bonuses, fancy office renovations. Show your customers that you remember who they are and why they chose you in the first place. Emma tugged on Sarah's sleeve. Mommy, you're talking loud like when you're upset about bills. The room erupted in chuckles. Sarah felt her face burn, but James was smiling at her with something that looked like pride. Emma's right, Sarah said. I do get loud when I talk about things that matter to me. And this matters because I've been one of those customers. I know what it feels like to have to put groceries back because the price went up and nobody warned you. After the meeting, James walked them back to his office. Emma had fallen asleep in her chair during the budget discussion, and Sarah carried her carefully so she wouldn't wake up. That was amazing, James said quietly. You gave them more insight in 30 minutes than our research team provided in 3 months. I probably talked too much. You talked exactly enough. Margaret, the woman with gray hair, she's our toughest critic. She was taking notes on everything you said. Sarah looked down at Emma, peaceful in her arms. Will this really work? Me doing this job? It's already working, James said. The question is, do you want it to work? Sarah thought about the bills on her kitchen counter, about the electricity that was still on because James had quietly paid the bill without telling her until after. She thought about Emma asking why they always had to move, why they couldn't stay in one place long enough to make real friends. Yes, she said. I want it to work. Good. Because I have another confession to make. Sarah's heart skipped. What kind of confession? James smiled, but there was nervousness in it. I've been thinking about you every day since I showed up at your apartment. About you and Emma. About how right it felt, sitting at your table, being part of something real. James? I'm not saying this to pressure you or make things complicated. I just want you to know that this job offer isn't about charity or guilt. It's about wanting you in my life, and this seemed like a way to make that happen without scaring you away. Sarah stared at him, this man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she'd been afraid to pray. Emma stirred in her arms, sighing in her sleep. You don't scare me, Sarah said softly. That's what scares me. 2 weeks into the job, Sarah felt like she was living someone else's life. Every morning, she dropped Emma off at the company's on-site daycare, a benefit she hadn't even known existed until Rebecca mentioned it casually on her first day. Emma loved it there, loved the toys and books and other children to play with. Sarah's office was small but had a window, something she'd never had before. She spent her days analyzing customer data and writing reports that people actually read and implemented. For the first time in years, she felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with how many orders she could carry or how long she could stay on her feet. The Morrison Industries project was moving forward. They'd rolled back the price increases just as Sarah had suggested, and customers were already starting to return. Sarah tried not to feel too proud of that, but it was hard not to smile when James forwarded her the latest sales numbers. Knock knock, a voice said from her doorway. Margaret, the gray-haired woman from the conference room, stood there with 2 cups of coffee. Sarah had learned that Margaret ran the financial analysis department and had been with the company for 15 years. She was smart and direct and a little intimidating. Coffee break? Margaret asked. Sure. Sarah saved her work and followed Margaret to the break room, which was bigger than Sarah's old apartment and had a view of the river. How are you settling in? Margaret asked as they sat at one of the small tables. Good, I think. Everyone's been really nice. Margaret smiled. You don't have to be diplomatic with me. I know this place can be overwhelming when you're not used to corporate culture. Sarah appreciated the honesty. It is overwhelming sometimes. I keep waiting for someone to realize I don't belong here. Imposter syndrome. We all get it. Even me, and I've been here forever. Margaret sipped her coffee. But I want you to know something. That Morrison analysis you did? I've been trying to convince management to roll back those price increases for 6 months. I had all the data, all the charts, all the projections. But I couldn't make them understand what it actually meant to their customers. You had the same information I did. I had the numbers. You had the story behind the numbers. There's a difference. Margaret leaned forward. James sees something in you. We all do. Don't let the fancy offices and expensive suits make you forget that you belong here. After Margaret left, Sarah sat in the break room for a few more minutes, watching boats move slowly down the river. She thought about her old life, the constant worry about money and the feeling that she was always one crisis away from losing everything. That fear was still there, but quieter now. Background noise instead of a constant scream. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Free for lunch? Want to show you something. Sarah found herself smiling as she typed back, yes. They met in the lobby, and James led her outside to where a sleek black car was waiting. Not a taxi or rideshare, but an actual driver in a uniform who opened the door for them. This is too much, Sarah said quietly as they settled into the leather seats. It's just lunch, James said, but he was smiling in a way that suggested it was more than just lunch. They drove through the city, past the diner where Sarah used to work double shifts, past the neighborhood where she and Emma had lived before moving to the apartment on 5th Street. Sarah watched familiar streets pass by through tinted windows, feeling like she was seeing her old life from a great distance. The car stopped in front of a small house with a blue door and a garden full of flowers. It was in a neighborhood Sarah had driven through but never imagined living in, the kind of place where kids rode bikes on quiet streets and neighbors knew each other's names. What is this? Sarah asked. A house, James said. For sale. I thought you might want to look at it. Sarah's heart stopped. James, I can't afford to buy a house. You could if you had help with the down payment. And with your new salary you could handle the mortgage. Sarah stared at the house, at the small front yard where Emma could play, at the windows that would let in morning light. It looked like home in a way their apartment never had. Why are you doing this? She asked. James was quiet for a moment. Because Emma asked me yesterday if we were friends forever or just for now. And I realized I want to be friends forever. I want to be part of your lives, really part of them. Not just someone who shows up sometimes. A real estate agent appeared from around the side of the house, a professional smile on her face. You must be James and Sarah. I'm Carol. Ready for the tour? The house was perfect in all the small ways that mattered. 3 bedrooms so Emma could have her own space. A kitchen big enough for a real table where they could eat breakfast together. A backyard with a swing set that the previous owners were leaving behind. Emma would love it here, Sarah thought as she walked through the rooms. She could have friends over, could invite kids from school to birthday parties, could finally have the normal childhood Sarah had always wanted to give her. The master bedroom has a walk-in closet, Carol was saying, and the bathroom was just renovated. Sarah nodded and made appropriate sounds, but her mind was spinning. This was too much, too fast. She'd known James for less than a month. Taking a job from him was one thing, but letting him help her buy a house felt like crossing a line she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. After the tour, they sat on the front steps while Carol made phone calls in her car. It's beautiful, Sarah said. But I don't know what this is, Sarah said, gesturing between them. I don't know what we're doing or where this is going. And I can't make decisions about Emma's life based on something I don't understand. James nodded slowly. You're right. I'm rushing things because I'm scared. Scared of what? Scared that you'll realize you don't need me anymore. That once your life is stable and you're doing well at work, you'll decide that having me around is more complicated than it's worth. Sarah turned to face him fully. Is that what you think? That I'm only here because I need help? I don't know what to think. I've never felt this way about anyone before. With Lisa, everything was surface level. Nice dinners, expensive vacations, but nothing real. With you. He trailed off, looking at his hands. With you, I feel like I matter. Not my money, not my success. Just me. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, like a door opening that she'd kept locked for a long time. James, look at me. He did, and she saw vulnerability there that probably no one else ever got to see. That first night, when you showed up at my apartment, you know what I thought? That I was crazy? I thought you were the first person in months who looked at me and saw someone worth saving. Not someone to pity or judge or fix, but someone worth the effort. Sarah took his hand. You matter to me too. Not because of what you can do for me, but because of who you are when you're sitting at my kitchen table making Emma laugh. James squeezed her hand. So what do we do about the house? Sarah looked at the blue door, at the windows that would frame Emma's childhood, at the yard where she could plant a garden and maybe learn to feel rooted somewhere. We take it slow, she said. I'll look at the numbers, figure out what I can actually afford. And if you want to help with the down payment, we'll call it a loan. With interest and payment plans and everything official. You don't trust me? I don't trust this, Sarah said, gesturing at the house, at the car, at the life that seemed too good to be true. But I'm learning to trust you. There's a difference. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Sarah worked during the day while Emma played at the daycare, learning letters and numbers from teachers who had actual education degrees. In the evenings, James would often stop by their apartment with dinner or groceries, never making a big deal about it, just showing up like it was the most natural thing in the world. Emma had started calling him my James, which made Sarah's heart do complicated things every time she heard it. Like when Emma would announce to strangers at the grocery store, "That's my James, he makes the best pancakes," or when she'd draw pictures of stick figures labeled Mommy, Emma, and James, and tape them to the refrigerator. She's getting attached, Sarah mentioned one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. Emma was in the living room, playing with the dollhouse James had brought her the previous week. Is that a problem? James asked, scraping plates into the sink. I don't know. What happens if this doesn't work out? What happens if you decide this life is too ordinary for you? James stopped washing dishes and turned to face her. What would I have to do to convince you that I'm not going anywhere? I don't know, Sarah admitted. I've never been in this situation before. What situation? Sarah struggled to put it into words. Having someone who wants to stay. Emma's father left the minute things got real. My parents wrote me off when I got pregnant. I've gotten used to people leaving when things get complicated. Things are already complicated, James pointed out. I'm still here. Before Sarah could respond, Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. James, will you read me a story? Of course, sweetheart. Go pick out a book. Emma scampered off and James dried his hands on the dish towel. We're not finished with this conversation. I know. Sarah watched James settle onto Emma's bed, Emma curled up beside him with a picture book about a little girl who befriends a dragon. His voice was gentle as he read, doing different voices for each character, making Emma giggle at all the right parts. This was what Sarah had pictured when she'd imagined Emma having a father figure. Not someone who showed up for the fun parts and disappeared when things got hard, but someone who read bedtime stories and remembered that Emma liked her toast cut into triangles and helped with homework without being asked. After Emma fell asleep, Sarah and James sat on the couch in the small living room. The space felt even smaller with both of them there, their knees touching as they tried to fit on the narrow cushions. "I got the loan approval for the house," Sarah said. "That's great news. The payment will be tight but manageable. And I talked to a lawyer about setting up the down payment as an official loan from you to me." James nodded. "Whatever makes you comfortable." "There's something else," Sarah said. "I want Emma to meet your parents. And you to meet Mrs. Chin downstairs and my old boss at the diner. If we're really doing this, if we're really trying to build something together, then I want you to know all of us. Not just the parts that fit easily into your world." "I'd like that," James said. "Though I should warn you, my parents can be intense." "Rich people intense or just regular parent intense?" "Rich people intense. They'll ask about your background and your intentions and probably offer you money to go away." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Seriously?" "Probably. They've never liked anyone I've dated. They thought Lisa was too shallow, Karen was too ambitious, Rachel was too independent." James smiled ruefully. "You're going to be too poor. Maybe we should wait on meeting the parents. Or maybe we should get it over with. They're coming to the city next weekend for some charity thing. We could have dinner." Sarah tried to imagine sitting across from people who might think she was after James's money, who might see Emma as baggage or a mistake. Her chest felt tight just thinking about it. "What if they're right?" she said quietly. "What if I am too poor? What if this is too weird, a billionaire and a single mom from the wrong side of town?" James shifted to face her fully. "Do you know what I did last weekend?" Sarah shook her head. "I went to 3 different stores looking for the cereal Emma likes, the one with the cartoon character on the box. And when I found it, I bought 6 boxes because I was so happy to have something to contribute to this house." He paused. "Before I met you, I hadn't been grocery shopping in probably 5 years. I had people who did that for me. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? You're worried about not having enough money to fit into my world. I'm worried about not having enough real-life experience to fit into yours." James took her hand. "Maybe we're both overthinking this." Emma's voice drifted from the bedroom, sleepy and content. "Mommy, is James staying over?" Sarah's cheeks burned. Emma had been asking that question more often lately, and Sarah never knew how to answer it. The truth was she liked having James there. She liked falling asleep knowing someone else was watching over them, liked waking up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Emma's laughter in the kitchen. "Not tonight, baby," Sarah called back. "Go back to sleep." "But I had a bad dream." James was already standing up. "I'll check on her." Sarah listened to James's quiet voice in the bedroom, reassuring Emma that bad dreams couldn't hurt her, that she was safe. When he came back to the living room, Emma's door was cracked open just enough to let hall light in. "She's okay," he said. "But she asked if I could stay until she falls asleep again." "You don't have to." "I want to." James sat back down, closer this time. "Sarah, I need to tell you something." The serious tone in his voice made Sarah's heart race. "What?" "I love her, Emma. I love that little girl like she's my own daughter. And I love you in a way that scares me because I've never felt anything this real before." He paused. "I know it's too soon to say that. I know we're still figuring things out. But I needed you to know." Sarah stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She thought about all the reasons she should be careful, all the ways this could go wrong, all the defenses she'd built up over the years to protect herself and Emma from disappointment. Then she thought about the way James had shown up that first night, how he'd listened without judging, how he'd made space in his life for a woman with nothing to offer but problems and a 4-year-old who asked too many questions. "I love you too," she whispered. James's smile was like sunrise, slow and warm and full of promise. He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and careful, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. When they broke apart, Emma's voice drifted from the bedroom again. "Are you kissing? Mrs. Chen says that's how you know someone loves you." Sarah and James looked at each other and started laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from joy and nerves and the strange relief of finally saying the words that had been sitting in both their hearts for weeks. "Go to sleep, Emma," Sarah called, still smiling. "Okay, Mommy. Good night, James. I love you too." And just like that, their little family of 2 became 3. The restaurant James chose for dinner with his parents was the kind of place where the waiters wore bow ties and the menus didn't have prices. Sarah had borrowed a dress from Rebecca, who was close to her size and had insisted that Sarah needed armor for this particular battle. "You look beautiful," James said as they waited in the lobby for his parents to arrive. "I look like I'm playing dress up," Sarah replied, tugging at the unfamiliar fabric. Emma stood between them, wearing her nicest dress and the patent leather shoes Sarah had splurged on for special occasions. She was excited about meeting James's parents, chattering about what she would tell them about her new school and her favorite books. "There they are," James said, nodding toward the entrance. Sarah's first thought was that James's parents looked exactly like what she'd expected rich people to look like. His father was tall and distinguished, with silver hair and a suit that probably cost more than Sarah's car. His mother was elegant in that polished way that came from a lifetime of expensive treatments and designer clothes. "James," his mother said, embracing him carefully so as not to wrinkle her outfit. "You look well. Mom, Dad, I'd like you to meet Sarah and Emma." Sarah extended her hand, hoping it wasn't sweaty. "It's nice to meet you both." James's father shook her hand with the kind of grip that felt like a test. "Robert Harrison. And this is my wife, Patricia." Patricia smiled, but it was the kind of smile people used when they were being polite rather than warm. "Hello, dear. And you must be Emma." Emma, who had never met a stranger she didn't like, beamed up at them. "Are you James's mommy and daddy?" "We are," Patricia said, her smile becoming slightly more genuine. "Do you want to see my new shoes?" James helped me pick them out. Sarah's heart clenched. Emma was already weaving James into the story of her life, claiming him as family in the casual way children did when they felt safe and loved. Dinner was exactly as awkward as Sarah had feared. Patricia asked polite questions about Sarah's work while clearly calculating the cost of her dress and jewelry. Robert discussed business with James while occasionally glancing at Emma, who was working her way through a plate of chicken fingers with the focused attention of a 4-year-old. "So, Sarah," Patricia said during a lull in conversation, "James tells us you're working as a consultant now. That must be quite a change from—" She paused delicately. "From waiting tables," Sarah finished. "Yes, it is. And how did you meet our son?" Sarah glanced at James, who nodded encouragingly. "He called me by mistake. Late one night when Emma was sick. We talked for a while and he came over to help." Robert raised an eyebrow. "He came over? To your apartment? In the middle of the night?" "It wasn't like that," James said quickly. "Sarah needed help and I wanted to help her." "How noble," Patricia murmured, and Sarah caught the edge in her voice. Emma, oblivious to the tension, piped up, "James brought me medicine and made mommy tea. Then he stayed for breakfast and made fluffy eggs." "How lovely," Patricia said, but her tone suggested she found it anything but lovely. The conversation continued in that vein, polite surface pleasantries hiding layers of judgment and disapproval. Sarah felt like she was being dissected, every answer evaluated for signs that she was after James's money or trying to trap him with a ready-made family. After dinner, while Emma was in the bathroom with James, Patricia leaned across the table towards Sarah. "I'm going to be direct with you, dear. James is a good man, but he's always been susceptible to charitable impulses. He sees someone in need and wants to fix their problems." Sarah's cheeks burned. "That's not what this is. Isn't it? A single mother, struggling financially, meets a wealthy man who's going through a difficult breakup? The timing is rather convenient. Mrs. Harrison, I understand your concern for your son, but—" "Do you?" "Because from where I sit, this looks like a woman who got very lucky with a wrong number phone call." Robert nodded in agreement. James has always been impulsive. He gets emotionally involved in situations without thinking through the long-term consequences. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, hot and fierce. These people didn't know her, didn't know what she'd been through or how hard she'd worked to build a life for Emma. They saw her address and her bank account and decided that was all there was to know. "You're right," she said quietly. "I did get lucky with that phone call. But not because of James's money. I got lucky because I found someone who sees me as more than just my circumstances. Someone who values what I have to offer, not just what I need." Patricia's expression didn't change. "And what exactly do you have to offer?" Before Sarah could answer, James and Emma returned to the table. Emma immediately climbed into Sarah's lap, sensing her tension the way children always did. "Is everything okay, Mommy?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart." But James was looking between Sarah and his parents with a frown. "What did I miss?" "Just getting to know each other," Robert said smoothly. The rest of the evening passed quickly. Patricia and Robert said goodbye with the same polite distance they'd shown all evening, though Patricia did unbend enough to tell Emma she was a lovely little girl. In the car afterward, Emma fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the late night and the effort of being on her best behavior. James and Sarah sat in silence as the driver navigated through city traffic. "They hate me," Sarah said finally. "They don't hate you. They just need time to adjust. Your mother thinks I'm a gold digger." James was quiet for a moment. "What did she say?" Sarah repeated the conversation, watching James's jaw tighten as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I hoped they'd be different with you." "It's okay. I expected it." "It's not okay." James's voice was sharp with anger. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and they can't see past their own prejudices to recognize that." Sarah looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Maybe they're not entirely wrong though. Maybe this is moving too fast. Maybe we should slow down, think about what we're really doing." "Is that what you want?" Sarah thought about the house with the blue door, about the job that made her feel useful and valued, about the way Emma lit up whenever James walked into a room. She thought about falling asleep next to someone who loved her, about building a life with someone who saw her as an equal partner rather than a problem to be solved. "No," she said softly. "But I don't want to come between you and your family either. You're not coming between us. They are, by refusing to accept the person I love." James reached over and took her hand. "My family doesn't get to decide who I spend my life with. I do. And I choose you." Emma stirred in Sarah's arms, mumbling something in her sleep about dragons and ice cream. Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair and felt something settle in her chest, like a decision she'd been avoiding finally making itself. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Okay, let's do this. Let's buy the house and figure out how to make this work and stop worrying about what other people think." Sarah turned to face James fully. "But I have one condition." "Anything." "The next time your parents want to have dinner, we're cooking at home. In our kitchen, at our table, with Emma's drawings on the refrigerator and toys on the floor. If they want to be part of our lives, they need to see our real lives." James smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him all evening. "Deal." Moving day arrived with the kind of chaos that comes from trying to pack 4 years of life into boxes while a 4-year-old helps, by packing her stuffed animals with the kitchen utensils. Sarah stood in the middle of her old apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the remnants of the life she was leaving behind. "I can't find Mr. Bunny," Emma announced, her voice edging toward panic. "He's in the box marked Emma's room," Sarah said, checking her list for the 100th time. "The one with the purple tape." James appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking annoyingly put together for someone who'd been hauling boxes since dawn. "The movers are here," he said, handing Sarah a cup. "They'll have everything loaded in about an hour." Sarah nodded, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. The house was real now. The keys were in her purse, the mortgage papers were signed, and in a few hours she and Emma would be sleeping in their new home. "Are you nervous?" James asked quietly. "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me this is all a mistake, that I can't actually afford this. The numbers work. We've been over them a dozen times." "I know. It's not about the numbers." Sarah looked around the tiny apartment that had been home for 2 years. "I've never owned anything before." "Not really. This feels too big, too permanent." Emma appeared with Mr. Bunny clutched in her arms and a concerned expression on her face. "Mommy, are we really never coming back here?" "Never," Sarah confirmed. "This isn't our home anymore." "But what if I forget something important?" Sarah knelt down to Emma's level. "Like what?" Like the way the light comes through the window in the morning? Or the sound the refrigerator makes when it's thinking?" Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Emma was 4, but she understood that leaving meant losing things you couldn't pack in boxes, the familiar sounds and smells and feelings that made a place feel safe. "You know what?" Sarah said. "We'll remember those things together. And we'll make new things to remember in the new house. Will James be there to help us remember?" Sarah looked up at James, who was watching them with soft eyes. "If he wants to be." "I want to be," James said simply. The actual move took most of the day. Sarah watched strangers carry her life from the old apartment to the house with the blue door, trying to reconcile the small pile of boxes with the years of memories they contained. Emma rode with James in his car, chattering excitedly about her new room and the swing set in the backyard. When they pulled up to the house, Sarah felt that flutter of disbelief again. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a front yard where Emma could ride her bike. It looked like the kind of house she dreamed about but never imagined actually living in. "Welcome home," James said as they stood on the front steps. Sarah turned the key in the lock and pushed open the blue door. The house smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Emma ran inside, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors as she explored rooms that were bigger than their entire old apartment. "My room has 2 windows," she called from upstairs. "And a closet big enough to hide in." Sarah and James followed her up, watching as Emma tested the acoustics of her new space by singing at the top of her lungs. The room was perfect for a little girl, not too big to feel scary, but spacious enough for all her toys and books and the inevitable accumulation of childhood treasures. "What do you think?" James asked as they stood in the doorway of what would be Sarah's room. The master bedroom was larger than any space Sarah had ever called her own. It had windows that faced east so she'd wake up to sunlight, and a bathroom where she could actually take a bath instead of just quick showers. "I think I might get lost in here," Sarah said. "You'll figure it out." They spent the afternoon unpacking boxes and trying to figure out where everything should go. Emma's toys looked small scattered across the living room floor, and Sarah's dishes barely filled half the kitchen cabinets. But gradually the house started to feel less like a museum and more like a home. That evening they ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor in the living room, surrounded by boxes and packing paper. Emma was exhausted but too excited to sleep, running between rooms to make sure everything was still there. "I like our new house," she announced, settling into Sarah's lap with a satisfied sigh. "Me too," Sarah said and meant it. After Emma finally fell asleep in her new bed, Sarah and James sat on the front steps, watching the quiet street settle into evening. The neighborhood was different from where they'd lived before, calmer, safer, full of families with children Emma's age. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. "For what?" "For this. For making it possible. For wanting to make it possible." James was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." "I used to drive around at night sometimes after Lisa and I broke up. Just driving, not going anywhere in particular. And I'd see houses like this one, with lights in the windows and cars in the driveways, and I'd wonder what it would feel like to have somewhere to belong." Sarah looked at the warm glow coming from their living room windows, at the small front garden she was already planning to fill with flowers. "And now you know?" "Now I know." James turned to face her. "Sarah, I have something to ask you." The serious tone in his voice made Sarah's heart skip. "What?" James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "I know it's soon," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I know we're still figuring things out and your in-laws think I'm crazy and we haven't even been together 6 months yet. James? But I also know that I want to wake up in this house every morning. I want to make Emma pancakes and help her with homework and teach her how to drive someday. I want to grow old with you and argue about what color to paint the kitchen and worry about our kids when they're teenagers." He opened the box, revealing a ring that was beautiful but not ostentatious, exactly what Sarah would have chosen if she'd ever let herself dream about such things. "Will you marry me?" Sarah stared at the ring, at this man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she'd been afraid to pray. 6 months ago she'd been struggling to keep the lights on. Now she was sitting on the steps of her own house, being proposed to by someone who loved her daughter as much as he loved her. "What about your parents?" she asked. "What about them?" "They'll think you're making a mistake." "Maybe I am," James said. "But it's my mistake to make. And honestly, I don't think it's a mistake. I think it's the smartest thing I've ever done." Sarah thought about Emma, asleep upstairs in her new room. She thought about the job that made her feel valued and capable, about the future that suddenly looked bright and stable and full of possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it, the house and the arguments about paint colors and worrying about teenagers and growing old together." James slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Which Sarah realized it probably had been. "I love you," he said, kissing her as the porch light cast golden shadows around them. "I love you too." From upstairs came Emma's sleepy voice. "Are you kissing again? Because I'm trying to sleep and you're being loud." They broke apart laughing and James called back, "Sorry, sweetheart. We'll be quieter." "It's okay. Mrs. Chin says kissing means you're happy. Are you happy?" Sarah looked at the ring on her finger, at the man beside her, at the home they'd built together in just a few short months. "Yes, Emma. We're very happy." "Good. Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" "Absolutely," James called back. And as they sat there on their front steps, Sarah realized that happiness could be as simple as pancakes on Saturday morning and someone to share them with. The wedding planning started simply enough. Sarah had always imagined that if she ever got married, it would be a small ceremony, Just a few close friends, maybe at City Hall or in someone's backyard. But James had different ideas. What about the botanical garden? He suggested one morning over breakfast. They have that beautiful rose arbor where we could have the ceremony. Emma looked up from her cereal, eyes bright with interest. Will there be flowers everywhere? Lots of flowers, James confirmed. And can I wear a pretty dress? The prettiest dress we can find. Sarah watched this exchange with mixed feelings. She wanted Emma to have the fairy tale wedding experience she dreamed about, but the botanical garden was expensive, formal, the kind of place where James's world would feel comfortable and hers might not. That sounds lovely, she said carefully, but maybe we should start smaller. Figure out the guest list first. That's when things got complicated. James's list included business associates, college friends, extended family members that Sarah had never heard of. People who would expect a certain kind of wedding held at a certain kind of venue, with a certain kind of budget. Sarah's list fit on half a page. Rebecca from work. Mrs. Chun from their old apartment building. Her former boss at the diner who'd been kind to her when Emma was sick. A few other single mothers she'd met at Emma's preschool. That's it? James asked, looking at her list. That's it. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. I don't have a lot of friends. Moving around a lot, working all the time, it doesn't leave much room for a social life. What about family? Sarah was quiet for a moment. My parents and I don't really talk anymore. Not since Emma was born. Why not? It was a conversation they'd never fully had, and Sarah wasn't sure she was ready for it now. But James was going to be her husband. He deserved to know the whole story. They wanted me to give Emma up for adoption, she said quietly. They thought I was too young, too irresponsible, that I was ruining my life. When I refused, they said I was on my own. James's jaw tightened. They cut you off completely? Pretty much. They send a birthday card to Emma every year, but that's about it. I think they're still hoping I'll come to my senses and realize what a mistake I made. The only mistake would have been listening to them. Sarah smiled, grateful for his certainty. I tried to patch things up a few times over the years. But they made it clear that Emma and I weren't welcome unless I was willing to admit I'd made wrong choices. Have you told them about the wedding? Not yet. Sarah took a breath. I'm not sure I'm going to. They were quiet for a moment, both thinking about families and expectations and the complicated ways people loved each other. What if we had 2 celebrations? James suggested finally. What do you mean? A big one for my family and business associates, all the formal stuff they expect. And a smaller one just for the people who really matter to both of us. Sarah considered this. That's a lot of work. And expense. The expense doesn't matter. And I think it might be worth the work to make sure we both feel comfortable on our wedding day. They decided on a compromise. The official ceremony would be at the botanical garden, with all the traditional elements James's family would expect. But the reception would be smaller, more intimate, held in the backyard of their new house with string lights and Emma's favorite music and food from the diner where Sarah used to work. Planning the wedding became a crash course in navigating 2 different worlds. Sarah learned about florists who charged more for centerpieces than she used to make in a week. James learned about potluck receptions and playlist wedding music instead of string quartets. Are you sure about this? Sarah asked one evening as they addressed invitations. They were sitting at their kitchen table, Emma coloring pictures of wedding dresses nearby. About marrying you? Absolutely. About all of this. Sarah gestured at the pile of formal invitations, the vendor contracts, the planning notebooks that had taken over their dining room. About having a wedding that costs more than some people make in a year. James set down his pen and looked at her seriously. What are you really asking? Sarah struggled to put her concerns into words. I'm asking if you're going to be okay with people thinking you married beneath yourself. I'm asking if you're prepared for your business associates to spend the whole reception wondering what you see in a waitress with a kid. Former waitress, James corrected. Current brilliant business consultant who revolutionized our approach to customer relations. James, I'm serious. So am I. He reached across the table and took her hand. Sarah, do you know what I see when I look at our wedding guest list? What? I see people who love you for who you are, and people who respect me for what I've achieved. And I'm hoping that by bringing them all together, both sides will learn something. Emma looked up from her coloring. What will they learn? Your mom's friends will see that having money doesn't automatically make someone a bad person. And my friends will see that not having money doesn't automatically make someone less worthy of respect. That's very wise, Emma said solemnly, then went back to her coloring. Sarah and James looked at each other and started laughing. When did our 4-year-old get so philosophical? Sarah asked. Probably around the time she started living with 2 adults who overthink everything, James replied. A week before the wedding, Sarah got a phone call she wasn't expecting. Sarah? It's your mother. Sarah almost dropped the phone. She hadn't heard her mother's voice in over a year. Mom. Hi. I heard. That is, Mrs. Peterson from down the street saw an announcement in the society pages. About your engagement. Sarah's heart sank. Of course they'd heard about the wedding through gossip rather than from her directly. Yes, I'm getting married next week. To a Harrison. From the Harrison Industries family. Yes. There was a long pause. That's wonderful, sweetheart. He must be a very nice man. Sarah almost laughed at the transparent calculation in her mother's voice. James was acceptable now, not because of who he was as a person, but because of his last name and bank account. He's a nice man, Mom. He's also Emma's stepfather now. Another pause. How is Emma? She's wonderful. She's smart and funny and kind, and she's going to be the flower girl at the wedding. I'm sure she's lovely. Sarah, your father and we've been thinking that maybe it's time we got to know our granddaughter better. There it was. The real reason for the call. Not to congratulate Sarah or express genuine interest in her happiness, but to position themselves for access to the Harrison family fortune. Mom, Sarah said quietly, where were you when Emma had pneumonia last winter? Where were you when I was working 16-hour days just to pay rent? Where were you for the past 4 years when I needed support? We hoped you'd come around. Realize that you needed to make different choices. I did make different choices. I chose to love my daughter and build a life for both of us. I chose to work hard and be independent. And I chose to marry a man who values those things about me. Sarah, please. We're family. No, Mom. Emma and James are my family. You and Dad are people who share my genetics but chose not to be part of my life when it mattered. Sarah hung up the phone, her hands shaking. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the tension in her mother's voice. Who was that, Mommy? My mother. Your grandmother. Emma's eyes widened. The one who sends birthday cards? That's the one. Is she coming to the wedding? Sarah knelt down and pulled Emma into a hug. No, sweetheart. She's not. Why not? Because sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people they love. And sometimes there are consequences for those choices. Emma nodded with the acceptance children showed when adults told them truths they weren't quite old enough to understand fully. It's okay, Mommy. James's family will be our family now. Sarah hoped that was true. She hoped James's parents would come around, would see Emma as their granddaughter and Sarah as their daughter-in-law. But even if they didn't, she knew Emma was right about the important thing. They already had a family. They'd chosen each other, and that was what mattered most. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of golden sunlight that made everything look like it was touched by magic. Sarah woke up in her new bedroom in the house she still couldn't quite believe was hers, and for a moment forgot what day it was. Then Emma bounded into the room, already dressed in her flower girl dress, a pale pink confection that made her look like a fairy tale princess. Mommy, it's wedding day, Emma announced, bouncing on the bed. Are you excited? Are you nervous? Do you think James is awake yet? Sarah laughed, pulling Emma into bed beside her. Yes, and probably. He's even more nervous than I am. Why is he nervous? He gets to marry you. And I get to marry him. Sometimes when something wonderful is about to happen, it makes you nervous because you want it to be perfect. Emma considered this seriously. Will it be perfect? I don't know about perfect, Sarah said, smoothing Emma's hair. But it will be ours. And that's better than perfect. Rebecca arrived an hour later with a team of people whose job was apparently to make Sarah look like a bride. Sarah had never had a professional makeup artist or hairstylist before, and she felt awkward sitting still while strangers fussed over her. Relax, Rebecca said, settling into a chair beside her with a cup of coffee. You're supposed to enjoy this part. I feel like I'm playing pretend, Sarah admitted as someone painted her fingernails a shade called Ivory Dreams. You're not playing pretend. You're getting married to a man who adores you and your daughter. That's as real as it gets. The wedding dress hung in the corner of the room, a simple but elegant gown that Sarah had fallen in love with the moment she saw it. It wasn't the most expensive dress in the shop, but it was perfect for her, classic and timeless, the kind of dress that would look beautiful in photos 20 years from now. I keep waiting for someone to tell me this is all a mistake, Sarah said as the makeup artist worked on her eyes. What kind of mistake? That I don't belong in this world. That I'm not good enough for James. That Emma and I are going to ruin his life somehow. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you something? I've worked for James for 3 years. In all that time, I've never seen him as happy as he's been since he met you. You didn't ruin his life, Sarah. You saved it. An hour later, Sarah stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, wearing her wedding dress and looking at a version of herself she barely recognized. The woman in the mirror looked confident, radiant, like someone who belonged in a fairy tale. "Mommy, you look like a princess," Emma breathed. "Thank you, sweetheart. You look pretty beautiful yourself." Emma beamed, twirling so her dress spun out around her. "Wait until James sees us. He's going to cry happy tears." The botanical garden was transformed with flowers and ribbons and twinkling lights. Sarah had worried it would feel too formal, too much like stepping into someone else's life, but as she walked down the aisle with Emma scattering rose petals ahead of her, it felt exactly right. James stood at the altar in a dark suit, looking handsome and nervous and completely overwhelmed. When he saw Sarah, his face lit up with the kind of smile that made her remember why she'd said yes to that first cup of coffee, why she'd opened her door to a stranger at 2 a.m, why she'd taken every leap of faith that had led her to this moment. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They'd written their own vows, and Sarah's voice shook as she promised to love James through good times and bad, to build a life together that honored both their dreams and their differences. "I promise to be your partner in everything," she said, looking into his eyes. "To trust you with my heart and my daughter's heart. To never take for granted the gift of being loved by you." James's vows made half the audience cry, including his parents who'd flown in from Chicago and spent the morning looking uncomfortable but trying to hide it. "I promise to love Emma as my own daughter," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "To be the father she deserves and the husband you deserve. To never forget that the best things in life aren't things at all, they're the people who make you feel like you're home." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Sarah with such joy that Emma cheered from her spot beside them. The audience applauded, and Sarah felt like she might float away from happiness. The reception in their backyard was everything Sarah had hoped it would be. String lights twinkled overhead, Emma ran around with the other children, and the catered barbecue from Sarah's old diner was a hit even with James's business associates. Sarah watched James talking with Mrs. Chin, who was telling him stories about Emma's early years in their old apartment building. She watched Rebecca dancing with Emma, spinning her around until she giggled with delight. She watched James's parents sitting at a table with some of the other single mothers from Emma's school, looking genuinely engaged in conversation for the first time all day. Having fun. James appeared beside her, pulling her into his arms for a slow dance even though the current song was definitely not slow. "The best fun," Sarah said, resting her head against his chest. "Thank you for this. For all of it. Thank you for saying yes. To the wedding, to the house, to taking a chance on a guy who called the wrong number." "Best wrong number ever," Sarah murmured. As the evening wound down, guests began to leave, hugging Sarah and James and promising to stay in touch. Emma had fallen asleep on a blanket under the stars, worn out from excitement and cake and dancing. James's parents approached them as they were cleaning up, looking uncertain but determined. "Sarah," Patricia said, "I owe you an apology." Sarah straightened, surprised. "You don't owe me anything." "I do. I made assumptions about you based on prejudices I didn't even realize I had. Watching you today, seeing how you and Emma have made James happier than I've ever seen him, I realize how wrong I was." Robert nodded. "We'd like to get to know you better. Both of you. If you'll let us." Sarah looked at James, who squeezed her hand encouragingly. "I'd like that," she said. "Emma would too. She's been asking about her grandparents." "All of her grandparents," Patricia said meaningfully, and Sarah realized James had told them about the phone call from her mother. "Some grandparents earn the title," Sarah said quietly. "Others just assume they deserve it." "We'd like to earn it," Robert said. "If you'll give us the chance." After everyone left, Sarah and James sat on their back porch, still in their wedding clothes, watching the stars come out. Emma was tucked into bed, clutching her bouquet of miniature roses and declaring it the best day of her entire life. "No regrets?" James asked, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them here, the late-night phone call, the leap of faith, the slow building of trust and love and family. She thought about Emma, who now had a father who adored her, and about herself, who had found a partner who valued her strength rather than just her need. "None," she said. "Not one." "Good. Because I have a confession to make." Sarah's heart skipped, but James was smiling. "What kind of confession?" "I didn't call you by mistake that night." Sarah pulled back to look at him. What do you mean? I mean, I did dial the wrong number, but it wasn't an accident. I was drunk and feeling sorry for myself, and I deliberately dialed a random number because I wanted to talk to someone who didn't know me, didn't know my problems, wouldn't judge me. Sarah stared at him. Are you serious? Completely serious. I wanted to talk to a stranger, someone who had no reason to care about my problems. I never expected to actually want to help that stranger. I never expected to fall in love. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. Then she started laughing, the kind of deep, joyful laughter that came from relief and surprise and perfect happiness. So it wasn't fate, she said. It was just loneliness and bad judgment and too much wine. Maybe. Or maybe fate works through loneliness and bad judgment and too much wine. Sarah kissed him, tasting wedding cake and champagne and the promise of forever. I love you, James Harrison. I love you too, Sarah Harrison. From inside the house came Emma's sleepy voice. Are you two kissing again? Because some of us are trying to sleep. They looked at each other and grinned. Some things never change, Sarah said. Thank goodness, James replied. And as they sat there on their porch, in their house, with their daughter sleeping peacefully upstairs, Sarah realized that sometimes the best things in life really did come from wrong numbers and second chances and the courage to say yes when everything in your life was telling you to say no. Sometimes the best things came from strangers who showed up at 2 in the morning and decided to stay forever.